So I think you talked about some of your recent work, but I know that there are some changes that you'd like to see go for E-rate.
Mhm.
And I know that there was recently like a broadband emergency bill that was just voted on, and I was reading it over. I saw though that it seems like it's not a long term; it's just a quick fix. And as we know, even without COVID, uh, there are still students who and work and the people in the workforce and elderly who need healthcare who are still not connected. So, what has emerged recently regarding E-rate?
Wow, so there's a lot of different things going on. That's the good news. There's pandemic has revealed the truth that there's a digital divide in this country. But again, good news. There's more interest in Washington in solving that digital divide and closing it than ever before. So I'm an optimist, and I want to tell you about some of the things we've got underway. First, last week, the FCC adopted what's called an emergency broadband benefit. Congress gave us $3.2 billion in an appropriations law late last year to set up a program for low-income households to get connected. $50 a month is available to help subsidize the cost of broadband. And there's also additional funds available on tribal lands, which matters for a state like Arizona, where you have so many Native communities. And there's also an additional discount to get a tablet or a computer. So it's really designed to help people who might be struggling in this pandemic and need to do more of their day-to-day online, but can't afford to do so. This program, I'm very proud. We got it out the door fast. It's going to take another month or two to get up and running, but it got out the door with bipartisan support, both sides of the aisle. And I think it can make a meaningful difference when it comes to broadband affordability for low-income households. Now, the challenge is something you mentioned right up front. What's the plan for the long term? Congress gave us $3.2 billion, and the demand for this program will dictate when those funds run out. So it may not be the long-term solution to affordability or the homework gap, but it is an important short-term measure. Now, in the long term, I'd like us to look at the E-rate program, which is a program that's been around since the late 90s, like when I had an AOL account. It was like a long time ago in digital terms. And in the late 90s, Congress was so forward thinking. They decided that we should connect our classrooms and libraries to the internet. I mean, we were probably calling it the information superhighway then, but they were really ahead of their time because they recognized this was going to be an important tool for education. And we should get every school, the big schools, the small schools, the rural schools, the urban schools connected. And this program has been this quiet powerhouse. It's the nation's largest education technology program. And I just think that we should also update it for the moment we're in. Could we use the E-rate program, for instance, to do things like allow the schools to loan out wireless hotspots to kids who might not have the internet connectivity they need at home to do their nightly schoolwork? Maybe there's some other creative ideas. I really believe in my I believe deep in my bones that this pandemic has forced so many educators to be creative. So let's learn at this moment what they know about connectivity and among their students and their teachers, and how can we use the E-rate program to help. So I set up a proceeding to take in comment on that. And then I know that Congress is also taking a look at this issue, possibly in the next big stimulus package, which is a really good thing, because recognizing we have to close this homework gap is really important. We can't let this homework gap become an education gap and a long-term opportunity gap. There are a lot of cruel things that we'll have to wrestle with in the aftermath of this virus when we get to the after times. But I want to make sure that when we do, we make it a priority to make sure every student has the connectivity they need to do their nightly schoolwork. Just like in past times, we made sure every student had the textbook they need to participate fully in class and do their homework. We got to start looking at this connectivity, I think, through the same lens and updating our programs either at the agency or through legislation to make that happen.
That's wonderful. And that brings up a couple of questions, but one of them is, I feel like, as you're saying, it's kind of an intersection of the FCC with other parts of our government, because not only do we need the connectivity, as you said, and it's so great that the E-rate is going to also help to purchase devices for students, because
Well,
money,
no,
you know,
it doesn't right now. It's just connectivity. The
oh,
broadband benefit program, sorry, I'm just being super technocratic.
yes,
We'll provide a discount for devices. That's
a
new.
discount. Okay, so that devices, and hopefully for professional development, perhaps for teachers, so that they can learn how to best deliver.
Yeah, so
That
important. This
instruction.
like, one of the things that always came up was like, if we can get the connectivity to the schools and if we can induce the best content to be available online for education, there's this missing component, and the Federal Communications Commission can't do it, but how do we make sure teachers have all the support they need to learn how to use these tools effectively and well? Like, we know they can be incredible, but how do we make sure they have the guidance and support they need to use them? And as a nation, we've kind of had this crash course right now in it. But I also hope that when we get to the other side, we think about what we learned here and recognize, what are the best practices for teachers and how do we make sure they have the support they need so that they can use them in their classrooms, both virtually and non.
Yes, and so I love that you coined the expression homework gap. We've had a guest here, a couple of guests at our meetings, and one kept talking about digital poverty. So what we would like to hear would be digital affluence, that our country have digital affluence instead of digital poverty, that all across the board, workers and learners, children and adults will have their life enhanced by better broadband connectivity. And on that note, I will pass it over to Allison Hall.
Hi there, so happy to have you with us today. So my question for you is, what are the proposed solutions to assuaging digital poverty where our involvement as a group can make a difference?
Well, first of all, I think that you are all on the front lines, right? You're working with educators. You have stories to tell. And I think when I wonder what, I think back to what's been most effective in Washington. A lot of times it's those stories. We want to know what you're seeing. How many kids are sitting in the parking lot outside of a fast food restaurant? How many are lingering after hours at school because they don't have the connections at home they need to do their nightly schoolwork? What solutions are you seeing? Is your town or where you live mapping where free Wi-Fi is available and not, and making sure every student knows? I just think we've got a lot in Washington to learn from those stories that you have and sharing them with us at the FCC. We've opened a docket to take in that kind of information, and sharing them with your state, local, and federally elected representatives is important. I believe that these kind of stories are going to make a difference, because when we start hearing something's happening in rural Arizona and it's happening in downtown Philadelphia and it's the same thing, to me, that's something, that's an American problem, and we got to figure out how to solve it. So I think your stories are very, very important. I'd encourage you to share them with the FCC, file them with us, and also make them known to everyone who is elected at every level nearby, because they need to understand that solving this is a priority. And also, it's something we're capable of doing. There are a lot of problems we have that are going to be very hard to solve. And I don't think this one is easy, but I think we are capable of making a meaningful difference and solving the homework gap in millions of students' lives. And I think it's really important, and we should go for it.
Thank you so much. We're well on our way, it seems. I'll pass it on to Paul for the next question.
As usual, the machine didn't want to unmute me. Sorry for the delay there. What you were just saying hits to the heart of what we were hoping we would accomplish with you today. We are at our hearts storytellers. We are at our hearts educators. We work in lifelong learning, and we are doing our best to collect those stories. You've sort of answered the question I wanted to ask you up front at the beginning level about how we bring these stories to the people you just mentioned. But more importantly, at a broad level, what can we be doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis for the long term to support your efforts and make a difference in bringing universal broadband across this country, getting across all the barriers that we all know exist?
Yeah, I think we have to start recognizing that we need 100% of households in this country to have access to water, 100% to have access to electricity, and 100% to have access to broadband. That's bigger than just students. It's broader than the homework gap. But I think we have to realize that you don't have a fair shot without having high-speed internet access at home. So as a nation, we're going to have to commit ourselves to two things: that we're going to have programs to make it affordable so everyone can have access, and we're going to have programs that ensure it gets deployed everywhere, including to rural communities where that infrastructure may not be at present. So these are things we need to do, and we have to sort of commit to 100% policy. Again, doing it at the local, state, and federal level at the same time is really important, because you want to make sure that every one of them has programs that are working together towards that goal. And there are things that can be done locally to aggregate demand. There are things that can be done with federal grant programs, and then those federal programs should work with state programs and not at cross purposes. So uniformly committing to that and making it a priority in all your advocacy is really important.
Let's get really specific. Look at the pain points you're feeling and trying to push this. You've been trying to push it, as have a lot of people on this call, for a long, long time. What is one thing we could be doing right now specifically? Is it that call to a legislator? Is it supporting FCC regulations?
Yeah, I would love,
here's what I need you to do today.
If you could get our docket number and file as many stories as you can with us. Well, I just think there's no shortage of stories out there about the homework gap and what it means. And I want to make sure that we have them on record, that they're an official part of our docket, and that we can then share them with others, because it's really important that we stare at those stories, understand them, understand the consequences when we make our choices about how to use the laws we have today to help address this problem.
Do you have a preferred format for that? Do you like text stories? Do you want them on video? Do you want anything we can do?
Oh my gosh. I love things on, that I love all of the above, but I think that in text format is the traditional way of sharing them on the FCC docket. You should follow up with my staff. We'll give you the ways that you can file. I just think we get lots of people from Washington coming up with ideas about how to use certain sections of the law to produce certain outcomes, and whether certain ideas are contemplated or not contemplated in language that might be legally vague. But I think your stories are really, really important, and I want to make sure they're featured prominently in our work too.
Thank you. All right, Lev and Sam, you just heard it. We have to hire 10 more storytellers in residence. I'm done. Thank you so much for the response.
We have a collection of stories. We have many, many, many. Ruben.
Yeah, so first, thank you, Jessica, so much for coming. It really is wonderful to have you here today. So you've heard just now from Paul the call to immediate action. This is a community that likes to do things, likes to make things happen. And believe me, you'll get so many stories you won't believe that there's enough time to even tell all those stories. But let's also talk about what this community also does. This is a community of practice that looks at the medium, at the long-term future as well. And if we look at the history of items such as, for instance, the United States Postal Service, we know that some of the impact of that didn't happen in the immediate term, but happened in the medium to long term. So let me ask you a question then. You've told us what you want us to be doing in the short term. As I say, believe me, stories on their way. But what do you think we should be looking at, talking about, sharing with you, getting out there for 5, 10, 20 years down the road? What do you need?
I love that you're thinking like that, because it's absolutely true. Short term, let's see if we can file your stories, make sure people understand what it's like. But I think the long term is we start looking at legislation at the state, local, and federal level, and make sure we build in the idea of serving 100% across the board. You know, it's something that you can think about when it comes to different authorities you have. I mean, let me give you an example. There's a lot of effort to come up with dig once policies in this country. And you might think it would have absolutely nothing to do with broadband, but it comes down to this. If you give out federal funding or local funding or state funding to help build a road, it adds 1% to the cost of that construction if you lay fiber in the ground beside it. People tend to like roads not being dug up multiple times, so it's sort of also helpful for the community. But what you're doing is you're future-proofing your infrastructure by building facilities at the same time. And it's a terrific example of how you can build sort of 100% thinking into every law that's available to you. And trying to find legislative and regulatory activities to build that thinking into, I think over time is going to make a really big difference. But committing to looking at everything that comes before your city council, your state legislature, and federal policy, and say, is there something here that we can do to make sure that we're future-proofing our nation's infrastructure in service of this idea of serving 100%? And by the way, that dig once policy, I think it's really important. If we wound up having it nationwide for all sorts of infrastructure funding, we would do a lot to make sure that there are fiber facilities available in more places. And that could be really powerful for the long haul.
That's absolutely wonderful, Jessica, and I couldn't agree more. So thank you. That we'll definitely get to work on that. My own bailiwick within this community is looking at black swans, and there's a whole world of opportunities that open up when you start thinking in terms of things such as dig once policies.
Yeah, look for the things that are like adjacent. There might be a way to incentivize the policies you need. That's the idea.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sure. I guess I'll pass it back to Lisa now for next round of questions.
Well, always cognizant of your time.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to go in a few minutes. I've got another thing back to back.
Thank you so much. We truly appreciate just the little bit of time that we've spent here. Now we can really, again, roll up our sleeves and get to work. Just did you have any questions for us before you leave?
Let's stay in touch. I want you to reach out to my office if you need help with getting your comments filed or thoughts and stories. But also, I just want to appreciate what you're doing. You're like a jolt of positive energy in this pandemic, thinking about how to connect more people in places. And I hope there are groups like you all around the country, because we're going to get things done if there are. So thank you. I appreciate the time to spend with you, but also just the work you're doing. We really, if I could copy what you're doing and make sure it's everywhere, I think we'd be in a good place. So thank you.
Thank you. We all have hope. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.